Ruchir Joshi is the author of the novel The Last Jet Engine Laugh and of Poriborton, an election diary, a road book about the 2011 state elections in West Bengal. He is also an editor and a columnist and has contributed to many journals and newspapers. As a filmmaker, he has directed documentaries and essay films, including the award-winning 11 Miles, Memories of Milk City, and Tales from Planet Kolkata. In conversation with Ruchir Joshi is Supriya Chaudhuri. Supriya Di is a very familiar face at the Kolkata Literary Meet, and we are honored to have her with us again. She is Professor of English Emerita at Jadavpur University, Kolkata, an eminent academician. And I would now like to request them to come and take their seats, and I will hand over to Supriya Di.
There has been a long interval between his last novel and this one. And I feel particularly excited to be introducing Ruchir Joshi's Great Eastern Hotel because it's not out yet. I mean, in a sense, it is eagerly anticipated. We do have a couple of copies on the table in front of us, but Ruchir informs me that these are not the final copies, and the final copies, these are advance copies. Final copies will be in bookshops very, very soon. You can pre-order yours. And therefore, there is really the thrill of something new, something that we have eagerly anticipated since some of us, at least, will have read Ruchir Joshi's The Last Jet Engine Laugh, which was published just around the turn of the century, 2000 or 2001. 2001. Ruchir, the first question that I want to ask you, because I have had something of an advanced taste of this novel, is that The Last Jet Engine Laugh, I don't know how many here have read it, but it is one of the most remarkable novels of the late 20th, early 21st centuries. Is a dystopian fantasy, a novel set in the future, a very imminent future, but still a future. And this novel, Great Eastern Hotel, looks back to our past, again, an immediate past, but still, nevertheless, the past. So, in a sense, Ruchir positions himself between between future and past, and yet all of his writing, in my view, and I read both these novels with close attention, all of his novels, all of his writing is very much concerned with the present. And that has also been very much the concern of Ruchir's filmmaking, because in these intervening years, Ruchir has been a writer, a filmmaker, a journalist, a short story writer, an editor. So, Ruchir, could you say something about that, please?
First of all, thank you, Supriya, for the kind words. Thank you, Kalam, for having this event. Malavika, for all the brave work the team is putting up. Really appreciate it. And the deft changing of venues, which has worked out to my mind very well. Very pleased to be showing this to the world here for the first time. Don't know if I particularly believe in novel launches and opening a book, but this is a non-slim, but I think very easy to read in terms of handling and everything book, which I hope some of you will be happy to engage with. I'm so glad Supriya has actually read the whole thing in a very short time. And here we are on the verge of releasing this into the world. So I'll come back to the book and the cover and stuff if we have time a little bit later. I'd like to speak about that. But right now, yes, Supriya, you're very right. The first book, which spans the period from 1930 to 2030, was actually released in 2001. So at that point, I was imagining 29 years into the future. And a lot of those 29 years, 25 of them are gone now. And one looks back and thinks, what did I get right? What did I get wrong? Also, the past, as I describe it, from 1930 to 2000, do I look at that past now differently than I did in 2000 when I finished the book? The answer has to be yes, because the more history you live, the more the past changes you through the different palimpsests and lenses that you look at it. One of the things that happened was that this is a book I wanted to write once I finished The Last Jet Engine Laugh. But as soon as I began to think about it, research it, plan it, the world began to explode. I mean, first 9/11 happened, then the Afghanistan war, then the war on Iraq, and the whole situation in the sort of West Asia, we can call it, exploding. Things happening all over India, as we know, between that time. And I was wondering, why am I writing a book now about a city which no longer exists, in a sense, from 70, 75, 80 years ago? And part of the journey of writing this book has been to find the answer to that question. Why does it continue to fascinate me? And what I found happening is I'd made a mistake. I'd chosen the most fecund, fertile, interesting period of Kolkata's history where everything goes crazy, and every day you still find more new things about what was happening in Calcutta between 1939 and 1949, that decade. And there's so much stuff. So then I realized that I cannot, cannot be like a child in a sweet shop, including everything in the book. The novel had to be dictated by the characters that were developing, and the characters are developing under the pressure of history, but the novel was developing under both the pressure of history and the pressure of the characters. And that is where we've ended up with what I hope is a work of literature first and a record of history second.
Thank you. Thank you for explaining that, Ruchir. I really, when you ended by talking about the characters and about all the things that you felt that you needed to put into the book, and yet it's impossible to put everything into a book. In your introduction, the prologue of the book, as well as in the early chapters, you do speak about this problem of trying to fit things in. And it seems to me, when I was reading the book, and I did read it very quickly, was that it seemed to me that you were working with a certain controlling analogies. And of course, that is a technique that is used by novelists very often, especially when they have a lot of material to put on board, like James Joyce in Ulysses or something like that, that you have a number of controlling metaphors or controlling analogies that you try to take through, or you have themes to which you recur. And it seems to me that early in the novel, you speak of a soundscape, the a storehouse of past sounds, which are gone now, but can be imagined or remembered. And it's not just sound, because there are sounds of an unclassifiable, chaotic and diverse kind that are recollected in this novel. But there is also music, and music forms one kind of analogy that I think Ruchir is using right through. So to take that one type of sound, you have a character introduced quite early, a pickpocket called Gopal, and it seems that Gopal needs various kinds of sound to help him in his trade of pickpocketing. He needs people's attention to be diverted by the kind of soundscape that they are inhabiting so that he can, unobtrusively pick somebody's pocket. At the same time, and that is why Gopal finds it slightly eerie when, in an early scene, the poet Rabindranath Tagore is being taken on his final journey to Nimtola Shashankhat for cremation. And the soundscape there is completely different from anything that he has been used to before. That's one possibility. The other possibility, as Ruchir says, is that it's as though you're playing different tracks on a record. You're taking off the needle, putting it here and there, and thus you pick up a story or a song from one point and introduce it and go with it for a while, and then you change it again to another song, another story. Would you say something about that?
If I may read a passage, maybe that might illustrate what you're saying. Okay, so the novel works on two planes as it begins. One is the action that is taking place in the time between the 7th of August, 1941, when Tagore dies, the day Tagore dies, and his funeral procession. From that point to early 1943, when the signs of famine are now they're unmistakable, and the Japanese have begun to bomb Calcutta, and all the things feared and not expected and not anticipated are all kind of besieging Calcutta. That's one period of time, but there's also another period from the 60s and 70s where people are looking back at that time, and the narrator, who we only find out later in the book who the narrator is talking to the reader directly. I do realize there is a fundamental difference between listening to music and reading a novel. But I've always wondered why people get freaked out. Sorry, that's too strong. Why readers become anxious when a bunch of new characters are introduced in a book. Why doesn't this happen, for instance, when you start listening to a big band track by Ellington or Basie? There you have a whole jungle of instruments coming at you from the first moment, or a lone clarinet joined by a horn, and then perhaps two saxophones. Or why don't people get jittery then? Why don't they immediately try to place each instrument on some kind of an aural map? You don't start rewinding, though now you can, when a piano riff suddenly breaks in and try and figure out its provenance. No, people are usually quite happy to let the music wash over them, for the melody to take them where it will. In a book, you'll maniacally start flipping back the pages like an accountant who's missed an entry. But with your music, you just go with the flow, to coin a phrase. No, I know. A musical note or phrase is what it is, both complete in itself, reward and satisfaction both attached, yet bearing the promise of more. People are different. They're never complete, or hardly ever, unless it's as a cartoon figure. And you're always unsure of the reward and satisfaction until and unless it's delivered to you. You, who of course are a person yourself and not a musical phrase. I know it's different with a story, but always a problem introducing too many characters too quickly. In a slight shift from my profession, perhaps you could think of me as an architect engineer building you a house or a museum, yes, beg your pardon, a hotel, building it room by room, allowing you to enter and occupy each space as it becomes habitable, making sure the wires and pipes are connected, that the window frames fit properly, that the stairs lead where they're supposed to, the landings aren't missing when you step on them. By the end of my assignment, you're in possession of the entire building, rooms and corridors of stories that together make up the whole tale. Let's say you continue living in it, this story hotel, while I've taken my money and gone. I'd like to guarantee the plumbing won't leak, that the wiring won't short circuit. But this is Calcutta we're talking about. The Calcutta of today, of the 1970s, and not the 1940s, and we have to be realistic.
Yes, well, that is a fabulous passage. And in fact, I was really struck by that passage quite early in the novel, particularly because of the ease with which the narrator here moves from the musical analogy to the architectural analogy. And it appears from some clues that we are given that the narrator, who is sort of an academic and a researcher, is either an architect or, a professor of architecture, art historian. This is something in that line. Not perhaps a professional architect, but maybe teaching the principles of architecture, but you have that sense that he is using the fundamentals of his profession to understand and to build a story out of the past. And for that, he needs to put these little bits together. And I must say that my experience reading the book was certainly not that I had to go back and refresh my memory as to who is whom. I mean, that I lost it and that I had to go back and tell myself that this is the person. No, it did not happen because it's an extraordinary flow in this narration. And here, you have one of the analogies that carries the story along. Towards the end of the book, almost at the very end, that analogy, the analogy from architecture, from building the Great Eastern Hotel, returns in a slightly different way. And I just want to read 2 lines. Maybe Ruchir will read more. With just the.
Make sure not to give away the.
No, I'm not giving anything away. I'm not giving anything away. But this character, the narrator, says, I remember Kahn, this is Louis Kahn's observation about ruined buildings actually being the most complete. Mixing metaphors, I wonder if a period of time can be seen as a building and the remnants of that history examined as you would a ruin. Now, Calcutta is like a ruined building. Calcutta is indeed full of ruined buildings, full of ruined places, and yet it is, like all ruined buildings, rich in history, rich in the, in the nooks and crannies and crevices that give us a sense of place. And a sense of place is something that is very important to this novel. I'd like to ask about another analogy that operates right through it, and this is the analogy from art, not just so much from architecture, but an analogy from art. One of the characters, a very important character in the novel, is an artist. And there is a great deal here because of the period. Think of the period from the early 1940s or even from 1939 onwards to, actually, although Ruchir speaks of a decade up to the end of the 1940s, in fact, the novel, the history, carries on beyond that, 50s, 60s, 70s, maybe the early 80s. So when you think of that period, it's a great period in the history of modernist art in India generally, and certainly in Calcutta. So could you speak a little bit about that element in the novel and the fact that art is such an important constituent of the way you've constructed your building?
So, as characters begin to develop in the book, it turns out that one of the main characters I was thinking of, something shifts in him. He already has a seed of wanting to be a painter. He's a great admirer of the Impressionists. And he continues his quest, but not without challenges. And he is a perverse and slightly stubborn individual in his own way, and also very, very harsh with himself, along with being quite critical of the world around him. And life situations, his own choices, put him in a position where he's trying to grapple with what's going on around him. But he's also dissatisfied with the way other painters, other modernist painters or just pre-modernist painters are dealing with their subject. So one of the recurring things that goes through the book is his biography, the paintings that he makes thinking back about that time, and how the stories behind the paintings then come alive, or how stories that happen to characters end up in paintings. So that kind of a yin and yang kind of pulsation, or a snake eating its own tail kind of movement between art or trying to depict reality and then the reality that is being depicted or not managing to be depicted. So that is one theme and one of the themes that kind of crystallized for me while I was writing this novel over the last 10, 12 years is, with all this stuff going on around in the world, is it the artist's job to immediately respond to what is happening now and find some kind of a response? Yes, sometimes, sure, that works. At other times, the reason why an artist is not a journalist or a blogger or a documentary maker or a reporter of some sort is because they are, they are actually mulling over what it is that's going on and mulling over what a response could be, and that response could come out through different angles years later from a completely different refraction. And that is at the core nature of art, that it is not an answer-giving thing, it's a question-raising thing. And so that was one of the things that's kind of followed through in the book, that as this man is living inside Calcutta, which then becomes in the Second World War, not just the Great Eastern Hotel plays a part, but the city itself is the Great Eastern Hotel. And in that Great Eastern Hotel, this man experiences stuff and then later on looks back at that experience and tries to process it through all his life. And that is part and parcel of the narrative of the book. So images, imagery, photographs, air surveillance, but paintings and drawings and sketches and references to other artists, all these are also things that kind of feed into giving us a collage of looking at that time, I guess.
Yes, well, thank you. When I read the book, I was really struck by these discussions of, these sections where air surveillance photography is being analyzed. I mean, there are photographs being taken of that first great event, which is the funeral of Tagore, the procession, that is to say, that takes his body to the Nimtola Shoshan. And these photographs have been taken, and there are these little dots, these little splotches, and they first can't make out what they are, and then it turns out that it's their footwear, slippers, chappals that have been abandoned by the crowd as they accompanied the poet. And it's not, obviously all the crowd had not, all of them lost their slippers. They had taken them off, presumably, out of a sense of reverence. Some have lost them, but some have also perhaps discarded them on the way, that accompanying the body barefoot. Well, that's also a possibility. So there is this attempt to analyze a picture, to work out what it is that is there and what does it represent. Ruchir was saying that obviously the job of art is not to immediately represent things. Maybe it is to look back at events in the past and distill what was important about them. But we must remember that in the context of the famine, and when you think of the genesis of the Calcutta Art Group, the artists of the Calcutta Art Group, many of them belong to that small group whom the People's War Group, whom P.C. Joshi sent out to chronicle the famine. So Sunil Jana took photographs, and Chitta Prasad, Zainul Abedin, and others, Shomnath Khor with Tebahaga a bit later, they sketched, drew pictures, reported through their art. And that too was an extraordinarily important and vivid moment in the history of modern art. So we find that in the artist, the artist whom Ruchir describes here, there are some sketches that are made at that time, sketches of, emaciated bodies, people dying, and so on. And they remind you, of course, of the kind of very, very vivid, unforgettable reportage of which Chitta Prasad and Zainul Abedin and others were the great exponents at that time, and their works were published in that journal, People's War, which was immediately banned by the British, of course, because the famine was never declared a famine. To this day, I mean, I don't think it has been, official records have not, still not calling it a famine. Maybe
I'm going to read a slightly long passage. I'll do some internal editing. Please bear with me. So it begins from, again, one of the themes that is picked up from the beginning of the novel is that as the funeral mass of people are following Tagore's cortege to the cremation ghat, there is a surveillance plane, a British Royal Air Force surveillance plane, circling overhead, photographing what is going on. And later on in the book, you see those photographs, and as Supriya pointed out, the analysis of those photographs. So from that point, every now and then, I've allowed myself the device, which is a realistic device because I've researched the reconnaissance units that were here in Calcutta. So suddenly you'll find yourself in a plane flying over Calcutta and looking at well-known landmarks and stuff, but with a completely new eye after an event or before an event and stuff like this. So here's one passage which begins there, goes into something else, and then ends up in the section about drawing and art. If you happen to be flying in a small aeroplane over Calcutta on the morning of 14th August 1942, the first thing you'd notice would be the plumes of smoke rising from different parts of the city. If you're flying at, say, 800 feet, your tiger moth would feel a slight buffeting from the wind that had carried away the last of the rain clouds from yesterday. The same wind that was turning the thinning plumes of smoke into wiry grey wisps, bending them at the very top before dispersing them into the atmosphere. As your aircraft came above the southernmost group of plumes, you would follow them down to the black gashes in the wide avenue from which they were rising. As your eyes adjusted, you would see the burnt shells of trams and buses in a vaguely straight line going past the unmistakable Victorian brickwork of the market in the south of the city, known variously as Jagu Bajar or Jodu Bajar. On the other side of the brick frontage, you would see the screwed cross-hatching of corrugated tin roofing that made the actual very un-English bazaar with pools of water collected on the narrow pathways between the roofs. Unlike on a normal morning, the market and the avenue would be almost devoid of people. The curfew is still in place in most parts of the city. Then the plane goes north, and we go to another part. And what it does is it circles around the stuff, and then it comes to alternately, the plane takes an alternative route this time. Alternately, you could begin with the flight from the north of the city, from where you might see a slightly different picture. If you took a heading south by southwest from Dum Dum Airfield, you would soon leave behind the hinterland with its mosaic of factories and water ponds and be juddering over the 5-point crossing at Shambajar. You would see the roads around the big traffic circle are deserted. Stretching below would be the road net of a city from which people seem to have been erased. From this point over Calcutta, you might not see the smoke rising from Jodu Bajar, far to the south. From here, it may seem as though fire and rain are both gone, leaving traces that are too fine to draw into the frames of the story. Cutting forward, you would cross the river, the cockpit windows rattling in the breeze coming over the water, and take the plane in a curve over the almost completed new bridge and Howrah station. You would then come back over the Hooghly, perhaps flying over the Governor House to slow down over the Great Eastern Hotel. In this approach, you would spot the dull olive green vehicles lined up outside the hotel, the roof and bonnet of many of them painted with the white 5-pointed star of the US Army. In either case, whether flying from the south or the north, looking down, you would see a section at the southern end of the hotel's terrace, fenced off with high netting to protect a rust-colored surface painted with the familiar design of neat white lines. With the sun strengthening towards what is sure to be a sweltering noon, on this rectangle of red-brown, you would see two figures engaging in short dance movements, yanking their shadows this way and that in the jerky choreography of a game of tennis. From the smack of the gut strings, the ball climbs and curves over the wire netting. Lambert's eyes follow it as it drops, obeying the parabola initiated by the racket until it passes the jut of the hotel building. It then develops a will of its own, plummeting straight down towards the lane below. The furry white orb, in those days tennis balls were white and not yellow, the furry white orb parts company with the stained whitewash of the hotel and becomes a planet against the dark grey of the road. It hits the asphalt and comes back up, the dot enlarging and receding and enlarging again until it bounces quietly towards the hooves of a pony tethered to a jhuri gadi. Before it can go under the horse, there's a blur of rags, a small child running to the ball trying to grab it. The ball evades the first snatch, but the kid traps it on the second attempt, down on all fours now. The boy moves away from the jodi gari, protecting the ball from the disinterested pony. A few feet down the street, he stops, looks around, squats down, and brings the thing to his mouth, teeth ready. Lambert's stomach tightens as the boy bites into the ball. The boy's head jerks back in shock, the dirty white wool unyielding, the hard rubber underneath hurting his teeth. But he doesn't give up, turns the thing and looks for another opening. This time the kid tries the seam, trying to suck it open, but the ball repels him again. The face turns upward, and even from this distance, Lambert can see the enlarged eyes, wide, staring at the sky, uncomprehending. The kid's stomach heaves, trying to bring out a howl, but he can only manage a scraping of breath. Not something Lambert can actually hear, yet he can. After a beat, Lambert realizes it's his own breath that's replicating what is beyond earshot. A woman, not old, yet ancient in her movement, comes out from behind the row of horse carriages and bends over the howling boy. She takes the ball from his hand, examines it, smells it, and then flings it away towards a runnel of water at the edge of the road. She grabs the boy's arm and drags him back into the shadows. And from there, I go into a whole description, which maybe I'll save for later, where this man is trying to paint the famine and is unable to do it properly. So he keeps drawing and fails, unlike Zainul Abedin or Chitto Prasad or Shobnath Hor or the others. He finds it very difficult. I mean, he's dissatisfied. He's seen their work and he finds he's not adequate. So he has to struggle to find some other way of working his art. And that's part of the novel then.
Again, thank you very much for reading that passage, which ends, as you can see, with this famished boy and his mother, and the fact that the boy, I mean, it's only slowly that you realize that the reason why the boy bites into the tennis ball is that he is hungry and he needs something to eat. And it's something that, you know, right through this long novel, there are these moments of realization where something that you had been tracking and reading with close attention suddenly turns out to be quite different from what you anticipated. You had not really understood that this is what the novelist is leading you towards. Now, when, Ruchir, you were reading that passage about the aerial reconnaissance, the aircraft looking at Calcutta from up above, two analogies or two references struck me. One is that famous early 1965 book on the city by Kevin Lynch called The Image of the City, where Lynch says that it's very difficult for us who live in the city to have any kind of image of the city. We live in the city, we are constantly pushed, crowded, jostled. We know the streets around where we live, but we don't really have a sense of what the entire city is like, as one would have if you saw it from the air. And therefore, we have to build in our minds an image of what the city is like. We carry that image in our heads. Sometimes we change it or edit it, or we introduce into it the familiar landmarks of the city, the Victoria Memorial, the Howrah Bridge, which is not there for the most part of the early part of your novel. But then they come in, but the early part, the Howrah Bridge is not there. And so you have these elements that you introduce. And if you think of Michel de Certeau's Walking in the City, there too you have this sense that on the one hand you walk in the city and you don't really have a sense of what the city is like. But then you climb up, and really uncannily he talks about climbing up to the World Trade Center in that passage, that from there you get this God's eye view of what the city, New York in that case, is like. And that building itself is soon to come down. And the city, in Calcutta's case, the city is constantly transforming itself. And through the novel too, I think the city is transforming itself, yes. Would you like to say a little bit about the changes that come about?
Yeah. So one of the things that is again mentioned at towards the end of the novel is a comparison between Paris and Calcutta, that Paris is a city of views and Calcutta somehow is a viewless city. And I began to think of Calcutta at that time, and I realized that these people in the aircraft, the very few people who could fly over the city, which was at that time, there were no commercial airlines as such. So it was very few people, maybe some amateur flyers, but mostly the military, RAF and the reconnaissance people would be the only ones who would get an aerial view of a very, very flat city. Rome, Paris, even London from Greenwich and from Primrose Hill, other cities, San Francisco, you have heights from which you can look down, even LA at points, all these different cities. You can look down Rio de Janeiro. You can look down and you can get a high view of the city when you look down at a town or a city, But Calcutta and Bombay, for example, Bombay even has Malabar Hill a little bit, but Calcutta has no such heights. So we are constantly only at street level till recently, when now, if I get invited to a friend's penthouse on the 20th floor or the 30th floor, I'm startled shocked, the Glenburn penthouse, but the view you get, which would have only been available from an aircraft in the 1940s. So it's about, again, how you see yourself in a city, how you visualize yourself, and that as giving you a sense of the city, a unity about it. And the city is transformed in many different ways across the period I'm describing. The Howrah Bridge is being built, but suddenly, after the Japanese declare war, large numbers of tracts of this area are taken over by the British Tommies, by Anzac troops, by American troops, by troops coming in from Africa, colonial troops from Africa. The hinterland is taken over by a lot of people coming in to build ammunition, work in ammunition factories and tent factories and things like that. Then come the Burmese refugees first, then come the famine refugees, then come the partition refugees. All of this is not described in detail in a list or something in the book. It's alluded to, a lot of it. Some of it is detailed, because this is not a history manual, it's a novel. But the city undergoes a huge transformation, both visual and, I would imagine, if you're living in the city at that time, in your soul, where you were living disappears in front of your eyes, And we, those of us who grew up much after this transformation took place, can only imagine that city and hear it from the people who were not only alive but conscious as young children or teenagers or whatever at that time.
Actually, when you were speaking, and it reminded me that you're a filmmaker, I was recalling that one scene in Satyajit Ray's Pratidwandi, where the adversary, where Siddhartha, the hero, and his girlfriend climb up to the top of the Tata Center, and they look down. That's, it's a film that is entirely street level. I mean, it is all about streets. It's about very close sort of jostling, people waiting for interviews, talking in coffee houses, and so on. But that's that one moment where Siddhartha and his girlfriend are on the top of the Tata Center, and they're looking down at a mammoth rally at the foot of the monument, and that is now Shahid Minar. And probably because of the crowds, probably this is shot on the 1st of May 1969, when the CPI-ML, was formed. But that's likely, it's not confirmed. But when you think of it, that's the one moment when these characters seem to be free, and yet you also understand the immense changes that are going to happen to their daily realities in what is happening all around them. I think that when you think of what happens to individual characters, because I'd like to take up two other subjects here. One is Ruchir's treatment of the individual scene, and there are some scenes that recur and are also recalled through the use of music, through the use of the references to Tagore's songs and so on. And on the other hand, characters. After all, there is a certain necessary restriction that the novelist works with, that they cannot have all the characters they want. I mean, they need to restrict themselves to a few characters. And there are some very important characters here, particularly one woman character, Nirupama, who appears right at the start and is more or less there up to the close of the novel. So would you like to talk a little bit about your characters?
Before I talk about them, maybe I should, if I could read from the very beginning of the book, that might set the scene, so to speak. 1 second. Oh, it's amazing that the siren has just sounded, because there are 2 scenes of the siren going off, which you don't hear in every part of Calcutta now. Where I live, I don't hear the siren. But I used to, when I was a kid around Lake Gardens, I could hear the siren. There's a siren of the Japanese bombers coming in, and there's a siren of the factories, which is this one. But that's quite eerie that that happened just now. I'm going to read from the very beginning of the book, from the prologue. Just going to read 2 pages. And that will introduce us to Nirupama. Let's start in reverse and make the 2 of them walk backwards. All the way back from the closed doors of hangar number 13, back through the thicket of waiting Dakota airplanes, back out through the gates of the military area, back over the asphalt that is already tremulous under the 10 o'clock sun of April, back half a mile to the makeshift bus stop where the old Leyland has come to an unconvincing halt. Let's make the bus driver take his foot off the hot brick of rubber that is his brake. Make the bus push its long rear end blindly back to the big road that goes all the way to Joshore if you let it. Make the vehicle undo its right turn towards the aerodrome and go back to the northeastern edge of Calcutta, to Ultodanga and its morning market with its smells of fish and overripe kumro. Make the rusty rear of the bus push impossibly back through the poke of rickshaws and telas of Narkeldanga and Belgachia. The cream-colored grill on its nose dripping steam and diesel vapor, let's pull the old monster back from the tangled lanes at the edge of the city to the center of town, where the avenues are straight and wide and watched over by the big European buildings. Let's reverse it all the way from Dum Dum Aerodrome and squeeze it back between the horse carriages and narrow Waterloo Street on the south side of the big hotel. Let's bring the 2 of them, mother and child, out of the bus and make them stand again at one end of the huge portico that shades the fancy stores that flank the entrance of the Great Eastern Hotel. Her name is Nirupama Mojumdar. At some point, the tall guy tried to get her to answer to Nellie for a couple of weeks, and then Pamela for another 5 days, until she started twisting his name into Indian and calling him first Boloram, and then the more revolutionary Bijon, instead of his real name. He didn't like the sound of that Boloram one little bit, and that Bijon even less, and so he stopped. Went back to trying to say her name right, as he had at the beginning. In the end, the last thing he called her was what she wanted, Niru, the R tripled by his foreigner's tongue, made into a stream jumping over a hollow place, only slightly different from how he said Nehru, as in, that guy Nehru needs to get himself a better hat. They said goodbyes a few streets away from here, him touching her on the shoulder, very light, which was more than she allowed him in public, and walked away to the idling jeep. So long, Niru, he'd said. No baby, no honey, no my love, and certainly not the one she liked best of all, sugar. Just so long. And then the stress on Niru, cutting her name out to keep in the top pocket of his fatigues, like a photograph from a newspaper, leaving all the surrounding columns hanging in strips. He'd had no name for the boy, because at the time he left, he didn't know the kid was going to come into existence. So that is the beginning of the book, where you know that there is someone called Nirupama Mojumdar, and she has a kid, and from all signs, from a departing American soldier. So,
well, thank you for reading that passage. I will leave it to the audience to become readers, to read this, to get this book and read it. I must say my own experience of reading the novel, and it's not entirely, it's not about just one time or about one group of persons. It is a novel that carries you through a long stretch of history, and it is attempting a series of takes on that history. It reminded me a little bit of Tarashankar Tarashankar's novel Monnantar, which is about the famine, and yet is not about the famine. It is about the period leading up to the famine. The famine is approaching at the end of that novel, Monnantar, which is very strange. Why is it called famine, Monnantar, when in fact the novel is not really about the famine? But as in Ruchir's novel, there is a very important woman character there, a woman character whose history is related through that novel. And that history involves also a search for independence. I think that's an important point to make about this novel, your novel, and the novels that were written in the 1940s and 1950s, in Bangla and in other languages as well, about independent women who, through the force of circumstances, through the crisis of the times that they lived through, were thrown adrift from other kinds of family or emotional or social moorings and had to make their own way in life. And this seems to me an important feature of many novels of that period. Bengali, this is a great period for Bengali fiction, the 1940s and 1950s. It's very important in that kind of fiction. It's important in Ruchir's novel. It's important to our understanding of, characters at that time and their histories. So at this point, I think we should open this session.
I'd like to make a couple of quick comments, if I may.
Sure.
One is this novel, never did one novelist owe so much to so many, can be said. I'm so glad that so many of the friends who've contributed to the book are all here present today. I won't name you all, but I'm so pleased to see the Calcutta group, but also people from Germany, from France, and from Delhi, and other places, and Bengalis from Calcutta who've gone to Germany and who are now back today. So it's a really moving moment for me because it's taken a long time. So thank you all for all the help that you put into the book. The one more thing I wanted to say is that it's another project after you finish writing a book like this that you get it into a cover that you like. And being quite obsessed with the visual field and, being a visual artist and a filmmaker myself, my last novel, Itu Chaudhuri had done the cover for my last novel, and I convinced him to work on this again. And between us, we've been working very hard on this cover I've just been suggesting or saying, wow, I like that, no, not that so much. Itu has come up with this cover. Itu, being very steeped in the Bengali artistic tradition, etc., created a font called Cal Deco and another font called Bong Deco, and this is Bong Deco. If you look carefully, you will see there is a whole modernist deco side to it and a Bangla script side to it. And at the same time, he's created the whole sense of the hotel and the whole in inviting you into the hotel kind of thing. I think it's a really wonderful cover. I can praise it freely because it's got nothing to do with me. It's Itu and and Ashok De, who both worked on this cover, and then a huge production thing. There's a book is being bound now as we speak. But the colors and the color scheme is from the novels and books of that time, of the 30s and 40s, the pink and the teal and the brown and all that. So all this is reflected here. I'm very happy to have finally got this on my hand yesterday. I'll stop here and wait for the questions. Thank you.
I'm very happy to be matching it.
Yes.
In my,
Actually, yes, I was going to say that how did you, my God, you hadn't seen the cover and you come perfectly
dressed.
You must come to every time I read from this book now.
Absolutely.
And in this sari.
Right. Thank you. So I think that we don't have very much time for questions, largely because every session has really overrun its time. So we'll take a couple of questions from the audience, please. Thank you. I can't really see very well, so I'll have to, if you put up your hand and I'll ask the mic to be delivered to you. Is there anybody has an immediate question? Yeah, no? Somebody did put up their hand. Yeah? Yeah, there is somebody there.
Hi, thanks for that. That was really interesting, inspiring. I was wondering what your thoughts about what your next project might be.
Sorry.
I was wondering what your thoughts about what your next project might be.
My next project. Didn't I hear somebody say yesterday that this is a question all writers hate, what is your next project? And I will do my level best, having worked on this for the best part of 20 years, to now water the filmmaker side of myself and the photographer and the painter side of myself. So I will be working on a keyboard, but not necessarily do with trying to put text between covers, not for some time. The next story or the next novel or the next nonfiction is going to have to push itself into my consciousness and onto my computer as and when it does. Right now, I'm going to look at film footage, sound footage, and really not to do with this novel, but completely different kind of work. As an essay filmmaker, I've just had 3 of my films restored in Berlin, and I've got other footage that I've recently shot. So I'd like to get back to that side of me and that side of my work. But yeah, eventually maybe some other book will emerge. I'm not promising, and I'm also not promising that it won't.
We can have one more question if there's anyone. There's somebody right at the back. No, somebody right, absolutely isolated at the back.
Hello, sir. My question was, you were mentioning, right, the artist's response towards what's happening around them. So the element of responsibility, can you elaborate on that, please?
Yeah, no, I get it. What would you say? I mean, some of the best art has been the most irresponsible art, which does not attempt to care directly for what is going on around. And yet some of the other most brilliant art that we've seen is something that's come directly from a political and quotidian engagement with what's happening. So both things work at the same time, parallelly, and sometimes in the same person, sometimes in very different people. All I'm saying is that as an artist, sometimes whatever it is you're doing immediately reflects your reality and your political views and your feelings about what's going on. And at other times, as an artist, you could be looking at the most terrible massacres and crimes and upheavals and the murder of the earth, and you don't know how to process it that moment, and it may come out 10 years later or 12 years or 15 years later, even more. So that is the nature, that's the mystery of art. We were discussing science and art yesterday on this stage at this time. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that becomes clear now is that science deals with answering questions and is looking to unearth different aspects of reality in a logical, rational way. And the reason why art is important, the irrationality of art is important, is because art actually works like, there is a whole analogy of rivers, which I've used from the Baul musicians here, mm-hmm. where it's like some rivers of knowledge go underground and reappear somewhere else where they have no business being. And other rivers change course in ways that you completely find unexpected. And it's a geographical fact that rivers change courses. So an artist's thinking, an artist's imagination, inspiration, what fruit comes out of that imagination, it's the unexpectedness of it, and it's not time-bound, is what I was trying to basically argue.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you. That was a wonderful response. And I don't know whether we can locate this person right at the back, but if not, then... Oh, yes, he's got the mic. Yeah.
I'd like to ask a question. As we have got to know that the novel is set in 1940s, 1950s Calcutta, and whenever we think of the past, I was just got to reminded of Zygmunt Bauman's concept retrotopia, and it is simultaneously imagined and real. So, in your novel, how do you represent Calcutta in real and imagined contexts?
But that's heterotopia is Foucault, so I don't know, was he saying retrotopia? I wasn't quite sure.
I didn't get your reference, but I'll take the core of your question and say that unlike other novels and short stories where I've yielded to the temptations of what one could broadly call magic realism, in this book, the only unreal stuff that happens is the stuff that happens in people's dreams. And it happens as the alternative histories that crop up in their dreams or in their imaginations and sometimes in their memory. But what is happening on the ground is one thing, and then what they fear, what they are terrorized by in their nightmares is the unreal part of the book. So I've used a very simple device, and I've kept things very simple to run these two parallel histories across that time. So I've avoided fancy footwork there, I think.
Thank you.
Thank you, Supriya.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Ruchir. Thank you for being a very, very attentive and patient audience. It's been a delight to be here and at the launch of this wonderful book. Thank you.